In Honduras, archaeologists pieced together fragments of an ancient message. What secrets could these symbols reveal about life among the Maya? Symbols can be the gateway to the hearts and minds of ancient people. Their decipherment is one of the greatest challenges facing archaeologists today. Copan, home of the ancient Maya in western Honduras. A rich legacy of architecture and art has been found here. Symbols of another time, left to be read by scientists today. Early explorers made careful drawings of these sites. They thought the ornate monuments contained writing that in time would reveal the history of the ancient ruins. In 1840, explorer John Lloyd Stevens wrote, "Standing as they do in the depth of a tropical forest, silent and solemn, their whole history is so entirely unknown, with hieroglyphics explaining all, but perfectly unintelligible. Who shall read them?" Could anyone read these odd markings? For more than a century, they tried, but the story of the Maya people, if these glyphs could reveal it, remained locked in stone. Had the Maya recorded their history? In the heartland of the Maya, another time capsule awaits discovery. What stories lie locked within these strange symbols? Decipherment of the Maya glyphs began with the discovery of rare Maya books, survivors of the tropical climate and the Spanish conquest. Archaeologist George Stewart.
This is a color facsimile of the Dresden Codex, actual size, real colors. It's made on, like the others, on bark paper, sized with lime plaster, on which the images were painted with fine hair brushes and pigment in about 5 or 6 different colors.
Many of these books were discovered by the 16th century Spanish. They were said to be filled with genealogies, prophecies, and religious beliefs. But to the Spanish conquerors, they were blasphemous. In 1562, Bishop Diego de Landa ordered them destroyed. "We found a large number of books in these characters, and as they contained nothing in which they were not to be seen superstition and lies of the devil, we burned them all, which caused them much affliction." Ironically, a book by Bishop Landa himself proved crucial to the understanding of Maya writing.
And in it is everything that he observed in Yucatan about the Maya, about their ceremonial cycles, their ritual calendars. He even had pictures of the glyphs drawn to put in the manuscript. And without that, we would know very little firsthand about the Maya.
With Landa as a guide, the nature of the ancient Maya books became clear. They were almanacs, used by priests to plan rituals. The bars and dots are numbers. A dot for 1, a bar for 5. These two symbols form the basis of a highly sophisticated mathematical system. It was used to record the movements of Venus and of the moon and sun. Astronomical events were linked to events on Earth through elaborate calculations of time.
They were operating with a fairly complicated kind of calendar. It counted the days in several systems. There was a 260-day cycle, a 365-day cycle, and then there was the great overriding cycle by which they really tamed eternity, and that was the long count.
With the long count, the Maya measured time from a beginning point thousands of years in the past. On this stela, or freestanding monument at Copan, long count glyphs compute the passage of 1,403,800 days since the Maya calendar began. Beyond the long count, The Maya also noted this date in ritual, lunar, and solar calendars. All of this to record a single day. And when was that on the Western calendar? Archaeologists again referred to Landa's book.
Bishop Landa said that, hey, these people are celebrating New Year's Day on 12 Con 0 Pop, and that's July the 16th, 1556. And knowing that, and knowing that an eclipse is mentioned on a certain date in the Dresden Codex, can begin to put all of those together and come up with a system that matches and is consistent throughout.
Archaeologists could now place the Maya in the context of world history. Most Maya inscriptions date from AD 300 to 900. But what had they written? The meaning of the other glyphs remained a mystery. A bizarre picture of the Maya was beginning to emerge.
These texts were accompanied by figures, scenes, and since they didn't understand anything but the dates, there was no way of telling who was depicted or what the scene was about. And thinking that perhaps the figures were priests and that here was a gentle people obsessed with time and nothing else, the Maya began to take on a non human aspect. Here was the strangest race of people that ever lived, sort of gentle astronomers forever gazing toward the sky and never doing anything that other people did.
20th century scholars wanted to believe in an idealized Maya past. No wars, no power struggles, no economic turmoil. But in the 1940s, evidence uncovered at magnificent ruins like Palenque in northern Mexico began to change this notion of a peaceful Maya. Archaeologists investigated a structure known as the Temple of the Inscriptions. The building's upper level seemed imposingly solid, but beneath it, archaeologists discovered a hidden staircase. It had been deliberately blocked with rubble in ancient times. It took 3 years to clear the debris. 100 feet down at the base of the staircase lay one of the most magnificent Maya tombs ever found. At its heart lay a limestone sarcophagus. Might these images carved on its surface reveal more about the ancient gravesite? Archaeologist Peter Matthews.
In 1952, the hieroglyphics could not be read, neither in this tomb inscription nor anywhere else at Palenque, apart from the dates. And it was considered at that stage that most of the burials that were dug up were those of priests.
The burial itself was proof of the extraordinary power and wealth of the deceased. The entire temple had been constructed around his elaborate tomb. But who was buried within? A jade portrait had masked his face. Would the rich symbolism reveal the dead man's true identity? In 1960, archaeologist Tatyana Proskuryakov provided an answer. Her discovery launched a revolution in Maya studies. For 3 decades, Proskuryakov had been drawing archaeologically based reconstructions of Maya sites. The grand Maya ruins were interpreted as vast ceremonial centers, the sites of elaborate rituals. Carved monuments were thought to portray Maya priests and gods. The extensive inscriptions carved on them were thought to have no historical value. But here in Piedras Negras, Guatemala, the dates on the monuments struck Proskuryakov as very curious. Several of the stelae at this remarkable site bear scenes like this. Footsteps lead from the base of the stela up along a ladder, then disappear into a niche to reveal a seated figure. Was this a Maya god? On stelae like this, Proskyryakov noted two prominent dates. The first was always followed by this glyph. The second, between 1 and 3 decades later, was followed by this glyph. The pattern of the dates, together with the scene depicted, led to a startling hypothesis. Perhaps these stelae depicted not gods, but kings, Maya kings on their ascent to power. Might the glyphs have recorded their births and ascent to the throne? Proskyryakov carefully charted these dates. Then she theorized that as each new ruler was seated, the previous ruler had died. From the birth of one ruler to the ascent of the next, the span of dates never exceeded a human lifetime. Clearly, this is not a portrait of a god, but of a young king on a throne. From below, he is watched by a woman, perhaps his wife or mother. For the first time, the glyphs were revealing Maya history.
Somebody came up and said, "You hear that Titania is working on a dynasty, a king list from Piedras Negras?" And everybody went, "Oh, come on, this can't be true." And I remember that vividly. And then I remember afterwards, when the publication came out, how clear it all looked. It was as if we only had a hint of what the Maya were. We thought they were astronomers and priests, and then all of a sudden, the glass is wiped clean, and there are people looking through. They're kings and mothers and children and regular people. It was a very refreshing time.
So the ancient glyphs might reveal grand stories of the Maya rulers. Still, scholars could only interpret isolated symbols. To read the ancient texts, they would have to understand the spoken language. When Spanish Bishop Landa made his observations of life in the Yucatan, at that time, Landa recorded what he called a Mayan ABC. But this alphabet didn't make sense until scholars realized that Landa had misunderstood just how the Maya wrote. Linda Sheely deciphers Mayan texts.
The Maya used two kinds of signs to spell things. One is called a logograph because it represents a whole word. The other is a phonetic sign that represents a syllable. For instance, if they wanted to spell the word jaguar, they could just use a picture of the animal. The word for jaguar in Maya is balam. Okay? Now, any Maya who saw the jaguar head is going to say balam, just like you're an English speaker, you see the jaguar, you'd say jaguar. But there's more than one cat. So they could draw their jaguar head and they could put a sign in front of it that tells you how to pronounce the first part of the word as ba. This is ba. Or they could put at the end of it a sign that tells you what the final sound was. This is a ma. But they could also, if they wanted to, just eliminate the jaguar head and spell it completely with syllables so that you would have ba, la, ma. Ba, la, ma, for ba, lam. And you don't pronounce the last A.
The glyphs recorded by Bishop Landa were in fact syllables, 27 syllables. But hundreds of syllables were needed to record ancient Mayan. Maya scribes often carved these glyphs in fanciful ways to resemble animals or people. The creativity and innovation of Maya scribes is one of the joys and challenges of deciphering. David Stewart, George Stewart's son, has been decoding Maya glyphs since he was a boy. Today, he is one of the world's leading epigraphers, scholars who decipher ancient texts.
The decipherment process may begin with a single inscription or a single glyph in an inscription that will provide a really telling clue about what the phonetic value for the sign might be. To look at an example, there's an inscription from a site in northern Yucatan that has a glyph that makes use of this sign that no one can read or could read before. And it's one of two signs in the spelling. The first one is one we actually know from Landa's original alphabet, Ma, and here is our unknown sign. And we know from the glyphs around it that it's talking about a certain individual who is an artist.
Together, these two glyphs form a word that describes an individual. It begins with the glyph on the left, Ma. In a Mayan Spanish dictionary, Stewart looks for Mayan words that begin with Ma.
And it turns out that mat means one who is knowledgeable or wise. And so mat seems to make sense in this context, and we can use that to propose that the second previously unknown sign might be tsa. So you get the spelling matza for mat, or someone who is wise.
So the glyph on the right might read Tsa. The last A is not pronounced, so the word is mats. Can the Tsa glyph be confirmed elsewhere? In different handwriting, it looks like this, as discovered in this stone carving. The glyph accompanies a scene that shows a woman conjuring up a spirit. Below the Tsa glyph is a known glyph, Ku. Together, they spell Tsak, a Mayan word meaning to conjure, and the Tsa glyph is confirmed. It can be added to this chart of known Maya syllables. Tsa. But many glyphs convey ideas and imagery not found in dictionaries. These words and images are symbols to be interpreted in the context of an ancient culture.
This glyph right here is the verb of this monument. And we expect that because it comes after the clinical information above it. And it's probably referring to bloodletting. And you can see represented a human hand with droplets coming down from between the fingers. Probably represents blood.
Blood was an essential element in Maya rituals. Maya paintings depict the gruesome sacrifice of captives. According to the Spanish, the Maya offered blood to appease their gods. Maya nobles committed excruciating acts of self-mutilation. Here, a woman pulls a rope embedded with thorns through her tongue. By spilling blood, the nobles believed they could communicate with powerful ancestral spirits. This monument commemorates another bloodletting. But whose?
In the glyphs that follow, we have the name of the person who's the subject of the sentence, the one who let the blood. And in this case, it's the king of Copan. He has various titles that tell us that, for instance, here, the number 13, that he was the 13th king in the sequence. Now, lastly, we have the personal name of the king. And you can see here another number using, in this case, 3 dots with 3 bars, being 18, and then finally the head of an animal, which is a rabbit. And this is the name of 18 Rabbit.
18 Rabbit, an odd name. But he was one of Copan's greatest kings. He reigned from AD 695 to 738. On monuments, he's portrayed as a great warrior and shown to communicate with powerful ancestors. A wealth of inscriptions at Copan tell of bloody rituals, sacred anniversaries, and political alliances with rulers of other Maya kingdoms. For the first time in centuries, the ancient Maya were speaking for themselves. At Palenque in southern Mexico, their voices revealed a grand dynasty that ruled for 10 generations.
1,830 years. On the third day, Lord sitting in place.
He was born the child of the mother.
14 days after Decoding. Then he crowned himself on March 11th,
Lady Quetzal, divine, conjured a spirit.
The mightiest voice in Palenque belonged to the man buried beneath the temple of the inscription. Archaeologist Peter Matthews.
We can now read this entire inscription. It begins over here with a date, the verb of which is recorded here, saying literally, he was born. We then move directly into another date, and these numbers here represent 4, followed by the glyph for a 20-year period here. So 4 times 20 years, or roughly 80 years between those two dates. And we get a glyph here giving the event of the second date, he died. And then the name of the person who both was born and died, the great son, Pakal, shown here by a shield sign, which is read Pakal in Maya. Finally, to end this first passage, we get the Holy Lord of Palenque, indicating that he was the king of Palenque.
A king at the age of 12, Pakal left a wealth of inscriptions that traces his lineage back 6 generations. His sons carried the lineage forward to reveal a phenomenal record of a ruling Maya dynasty. But the writing also revealed an abrupt and puzzling break in the dynastic succession. This is the palace, begun by Pakal and continued by his sons, including Khan Shul. Work began on an elaborate tablet that would commemorate Khan Shul's dedication of the building. The tablet contains detailed information about Khan Shul's life, his birth date, his parents' names, his brother's reign as king, and finally, the rise to power of Khan Shul himself. But Khan Shul never dedicated the building at Palenque. The last fragments of the tablet name a different king.
The dedication, which we would have expected to have been undertaken by Khan Shul, and the entire text is leading up to that event, was in fact undertaken by someone else. So that this posed something of a problem for us in our earlier interpretations of this tablet. Why is a new individual coming in on the scene for this very important ceremony that the entire tablet was leading up to?
At another kingdom, 50 miles south of Palenque, archaeologists found the answer.
We discovered a monument at Tonina in which Khan Shul is portrayed as captive. He still has a royal diadem on his forehead, but on his thigh is carved his name glyph and a glyph saying Lord of Palenque. So we're under no doubt that Khan Shul was captured by a king, by his contemporary ruler from the nearby site of Tonina.
Maya rulers portrayed themselves as fierce warriors. Kings celebrated the defeat of rivals in carvings like this. Across the centuries, a rope-bound captive pleads for mercy. Archaeologists now believe it was war and not peaceful stargazing that motivated the detailed star charts of the Maya. The moon and the sun may have guided planting and harvesting, but the appearance of Venus signaled a time for war. Khan Shul fell victim to such a war. But because Maya kings used writing to create the impression of power and authority, Khan Shul's successors never mention his defeat. To archaeologists, the lesson is clear. You can't believe everything you read.
What that means for the archaeologist is that you always have to find independent kinds of evidence to try to see how reliable certain kinds of information is. For example, if a Maya king portrays himself as a powerful warrior, is there any other independent evidence in the form of fortifications or captives or or ceremonies or burials or whatever, which would lead you to expect that warfare was going on a fairly large scale. Sometimes there is, sometimes there isn't.
The carved steps of the hieroglyphic stairway at Copan are an excellent example of Maya political propaganda. Covered with 1,300 glyphs, these steps form the longest single inscription in Mesoamerica. Archaeologist Bill Fash.
The hieroglyphic stairway represents an encyclopedia of Copan history. What it's saying is that Copan is a powerful kingdom. It has been from its inception, and all of the Copan kings were great warriors. The interesting thing is when you look at the archaeological context of the stairway, you realize that all was not well in River City.
Workers enter a tunnel behind the staircase. 12 centuries earlier, other workers had built the hieroglyphic stairs on top of an existing building. The space between was filled with rubble, which was usually densely packed. But this fill is very loose. Why such shoddy construction? Was it evidence that the king who commissioned the stairway had little support among his workers? What had gone wrong? Once again, a Maya king had been killed by a rival kingdom. At Copan, that king was 18 Rabbit. The hieroglyphic staircase was built by his successors in a symbolic attempt to assert the status of Copan's ruling dynasty.
So in fact, we believe the stairway is a beautiful example of political propaganda. They were trying to make up for the fact that they lost the 13th king in war by projecting an image of all of the Copan kings as glorious and powerful warriors.
And so the elaborate inscriptions of the ancient Maya were created largely to bolster the power of their rulers. The Maya and Sumerian economies were very different. Who then were the Maya painters and carvers? Except for their artwork, they left little record of themselves. But occasionally they signed their names. Several signatures crowd the base of this stela from Piedras Negras. A bat glyph precedes each signature and means the carving of. The glyphs below each bat name the carver. These scribes were first identified by David Stewart.
And it's interesting that some of them are actually called Ahau or Lord. So they seem to be very high-ranking people. They're not a separate class of artists that would come in and work on these elite monuments and then leave. They were really an important part of the high-ranking social makeup of Maya society. And there's a wonderful example that really illustrates this clearly. This is from a painted vessel, not a stone monument, but it has a very clear signature of the artist, and it says, it is the painting of a certain individual. And what's so interesting is that the rest of this text talks about the mother and the father of the artist, saying that he's the child of the queen and of the king of Naranjo.
The son of the king was a Maya scribe. Here was a culture where literacy itself was a symbol of status. Archaeologist Bill Sanders.
The writing system, I doubt, was understood by more than 10 or 20% of the population. The rest of the population, I'm sure, understood the meaning of the icons, the carvings of gods, the representations of the kings, and the symbols that they carried on their dress, headdress, and so on. When they came here for the great public ceremonies, they would see these things and understand what they meant.
But for today's archaeologists, the meaning of these symbols is more elusive. At Copan, artist Barbara Fash directs the reconstruction of a building commemorated after the death of King 18 Rabbit. The workers are guided by an ancient pattern on a surviving wall. How do scholars interpret patterns like this? which don't contain specific information like dates or words.
If you look at the side of the building that was still in place, and you see the regular course of rock going horizontal, and then there are these pieces going diagonally and weaving in with each other, and they form like a herringbone sort of pattern. What it is it's a mat with the pieces of the mat weaving in between each other, and that's what you're meant to be seeing.
Solo se le pone mezcla aquí alrededor.
In all, 10 mats were carved on this building.
Seis, nueve.
According to the 16th century Spanish conquerors, the mat was a Maya symbol of authority. The Spanish wrote about community houses, where kings and nobles sat on mats as they discussed business. Was this a community house? The team searches for more symbolic evidence.
Once we documented all the different mats around the building, then we started looking at some of the other motifs that were on the building. And what surprised us was that in between every mat, there was a hieroglyph.
Perhaps the glyphs would clarify the mat symbol. But they had fallen from the wall and were found in pieces down a steep slope.
Ya más o menos podemos ver la parte de abajo, ¿verdad? Ya estamos llegando. Ajá.
Sorting through the rubble, the team searched for bits of sculpture. At Copan's archaeological laboratory, the fragments sit like giant pieces of a puzzle, waiting to be assembled. Barbara and her husband Bill begin to compare the stones. Perhaps the patterns will line up.
I think that's good.
Success. Barbara checks the match on a glyph across 4 large stones.
This is nice too. It's just
Right.
Still, the match is puzzling. The glyph doesn't spell a Mayan word. Instead, Barbara and Bill Fash think it might symbolize a family or region on the king's council.
What we think is they were sending in their head person of the mat, to be here at the main community house in the central part of the site core. And here they were conferring and meeting with the head ruler at the time.
So this fish, like the other glyphs between the mats, might name a member of the king's council. But these glyphs have also been interpreted as religious icons. The symbolism is not specific enough to confirm that the building is indeed a council house. Archaeologists cast a still wider net to look at other evidence of life in 8th century Copan. 18 Rabbit had been captured and killed. The hieroglyphic staircase was built by his successors in an attempt to restore their prestige. Was the council house also a reaction to the death of 18 Rabbit? Moving away from the royal center, archaeologists turn their attention to the important families of the Copan Valley. How powerful were the heads of these lineages? Might they have sat in council with the Copan king? This residential compound is located a half-mile from the royal center of Copan. 40 or 50 impressive stone buildings surround plazas like this one. Dominating the compound is the imposing house of the lineage head. It's only partially restored. The original facade was about 23 feet high, with a roof of stone.
You think that sample of 8 dates is going to pretty much be the same range as...
Archaeologists Bill Sanders and David Webster led a 4-year excavation at this site, known as the House of the Bacabs.
This is a very impressive household. When we finished excavating all of the buildings and all of the courtyards, we discovered that a population of some 200 to 250 people were close relatives, probably, or retainers of some kind, to a single family and lord who lived in one of the units within this large mass of masonry that you see here. He lived in a very palatial house with a sculpted facade, had a vaulted roof on it. So clearly he was a man of great power and wealth.
And what else did the symbolism reveal about this man? In 1980, excavators began to push heaps of stone and earth aside to reveal walls and steps. Archaeologist Bill Fash was part of the excavation team.
During that process, we also discovered that the whole building had been covered with sculpture because there were literally hundreds of fragments of sculpture. What we wanted to find out was what these symbols meant. Why were they placed on the buildings? What could they tell us about the elite lineage that lived in this particular structure?
The pieces of sculpture are delicate. Their sizes vary greatly. The team at Copan arranges and rearranges them in a giant sandbox.
Okay, get it centered a little more because you're getting over to this side. You want me to take a turn?
Eventually, the pieces form a neat fit. Once they're reconstructed, some of them will be returned to the original site.
After we fitted these particular pieces back together in the sandbox, then we wanted to try them out on the building itself and see how they worked out. And we had some good structural evidence that they did actually fit here because they actually made it into the spaces left by the original restoration. In the left hand, the figure is carrying an instrument, a conch shell that's been cut in half or sectioned. And in looking at other examples of this kind of an instrument or tool in Maya art, it's clear that these were used as receptacles for paint. This is basically his paint pot. And what that tells us is that the figure in this niche represents a scribe or a patron of classic Maya scribes.
The lord of the compound may have been a scribe. He was also one of the most powerful men in 8th century Copan. Not only did his compound boast ornate sculpture and masonry, he owned an elaborately carved throne.
The discovery of this hieroglyphic bench or throne in Sepulturas was one of the most exciting moments in the history of archaeology in the Copan Valley. The text starts with the date, like in all Maya inscriptions, telling you when the events took place, in the latter part of the 8th century AD. After they give you the date, then they always present you with the verb. The verb is a house dedication ceremony. In fact, in this part of it, you can actually see the glyph for house with thatching in the roof. So we know that on this date, late in the 8th century AD, this house or building was dedicated. After the verb, in Maya writing, they always give you the name of the person involved in the action. So the house dedication ceremony was performed by an individual whose name appears here. His name is read Mak Chanal. After that, Dave Stewart deciphered this glyph to be a parentage statement saying that Mak Chanal was the son of a woman named Lady Ahau Keen. After the mother's name, then they tell you that he was the successor of a man named Ku Awil. Thereafter, they give you some more of the titles of our friend Mak Chanal, all the way to this glyph right here. This was recently read by David Stewart as A'ul, which means courtier. So what that tells us is that Mak Chanal was a member of the royal court of King Yashpak, labeled by this glyph and by the Copan emblem or city glyph back here. David's decipherment was of crucial interest to us as archaeologists because although we were able to predict which sites were the residences of the elite members of Copan society, we couldn't know what their role was in the larger scheme of things.
Other courtier glyphs have been found at Copan. These courtiers may have also been scribes or warriors or artisans. Perhaps the king awarded their titles in exchange for loyalty in the years following 18 Rabbit's death. The discovery of the courtier glyph exposed a shift in the content of Maya inscriptions. For the first time, the Maya elite were writing not about kings and queens, but about themselves.
At Copan, we get lots of different people named in the texts who are not the king, who may have been related to the king by blood or political appointment or something. And it's something that we see at other Maya sites as well. I interpret this to be a decentralization of the power base that the king once had. The kings were not as important as they once were. There were many nobles who could erect their own inscriptions and feature themselves in the high art.
A change was beginning to take place among the 8th century Maya. The symbolic evidence is both written and non-written. A nobleman's fortune seemed to be on the rise, while a succession of kings struggled to recover their power after a defeat by foreigners. The mats and glyphs carved into this building might indeed suggest that kings were sharing their power with noblemen like the scribe. But the search for evidence goes on. The symbolic residue of ancient lives, rich with meaning, shrouded in mystery. Each discovery brings new insight. Each excavation adds to our understanding. From out of the past, signs and symbols create an astounding portrait of life in ancient societies. In the pyramids and monuments of the ancient Maya, workers search for clues to the emergence of a vanished civilization. These are the ruins of the ancient city of Copan, Honduras. Dozens of stone monuments called stelae proclaim the power of mighty beings. Until experts could read these carved hieroglyphs, most scholars thought these larger-than-life figures represented Maya gods. But we now know they are portraits of Copan's rulers, with names like Boots Chan, Smoke Shell, the most powerful of all, 18 Rabbit. The Maya called them Chahul Ahau, or Divine Lord. The title was inherited. We call them kings, since they passed their power to brothers or sons. A dynasty of 16 kings ruled Copan for 400 years. How did they first acquire their power? And how were the Maya governed before the kings? To answer such questions, archaeologists discuss their ideas of political change.
Which says, here's the resolution, but you've got no enforcement.
Who's the arbitrator?
The arbitrator is the chief.
All right, this is the interesting situation.
Everyone in this group is guided by the same basic model of political evolution. It says that as a society evolves, fewer and fewer people control the wealth, and the rest provide the labor. As distinct classes emerge, rulers centralize political power. Political organization changes as populations grow. Small bands and tribes evolve into chiefdoms and finally into states. Some states, like ancient Rome, become huge empires. These archaeologists want to find out just how far political evolution proceeded in Copan. They want to know why it stopped. To discover the roots of that evolution, two archaeologists begin a journey in search of the very first Copan residents. Rebecca Story is a physical anthropologist, an expert on human skeletons. Story is joined by archaeologist Dolph Widmer. Both are from the University of Houston. As they seek the roots of Maya leadership, Story and Widmer are inspired by a single basic question. Did some of the earliest people here gain more power and prestige than others?
We actually know very little about the earliest inhabitants of the Copan Valley.
What we do know is that there were very few of them because there are not very many archaeological sites from an early period.
The archaeologists believe that as early as the 11th century BC, a few hundred people farmed here. According to their model, the first settlers were organized as a tribe. With plenty of land, no one person held an economic advantage over anyone else. To test their model, Widmer and Story follow guide Arturo Sandoval to the limestone caves of Copan.
All we know about the caves surrounding the Copan Valley is that some of them were explored in the 1890s by an archaeologist named Gordon, and in some of them he found what he thought was very early pottery and some human skeletons.
Story and Widmer reached the first small chamber. Gordon reported that he found the bones and pots in a second chamber beyond this one.
Looks like it fit in the other one. It's longer too.
Yeah, but I can see the bottom. Don't see any bats.
Human bones. Human bones, yes.
The cave floor is made of limestone and decomposed bat guano. That's the reason for the masks. The dry soil has preserved the bones for 3,000 years or more.
Good place to put a pit.
Yeah.
Fit right here. Depending on the age and sex pattern that we find among the skeletons, it'll tell us a lot about the social organization of that culture. If everyone is treated the same way, whether they're old or young, male or female, then it's pretty much a society where everyone was equal or treated fairly equally. If, however, some people are treated better than others, then it may be an indication that there were inequalities in that society and that not everybody was equal. Some people were entitled to a more elaborate burial treatment, for example. Back out to where we can stand up.
Back in her laboratory, Story separated the bones by type.
It was quickly obvious that we had some of the same bones that were very different in size. And in fact, a bone like this one, the head of the femur, which goes into your hip, is a very good diagnostic bone by size to distinguish sex in most human populations. Therefore, it was quite obvious that both males and females were present in the deposit. We were also able to find quite distinct differences in size that indicate children versus adults. So for instance, here's a collarbone, that's a child's, and here's what the adult size would be. Then we could look at the vertebra, for instance, and we could find vertebra with nice smooth edges like this. Then look at this other vertebra here. See the bone spur coming out? That's arthritis and happens as a result of age. By looking at all this, it's quite obvious that children, adults, males and females, young adults and old adults are all present in the deposit.
According to Story, everyone in the cave was treated the same, so the burial practice is called egalitarian. But to say that the whole society was egalitarian, that no one held a formal or inherited position, would require more evidence. Based on their model, however, Story and her colleagues conclude that the leaders of the earliest tribes probably had no real power over their peers. To rely on an abstract model for conclusions can be frustrating. A leader of the excavations in Copan since 1980 is archaeologist William Sanders.
An objective of archaeological research is to try to reconstruct the whole culture from top to bottom, from the economy and technology up to the religion. The problem is that what we find in the field as data is primarily information on technology, on the material culture. We find buildings and potsherds and stone tools and things like that. So how do you move from that data to the organization of society and then to their religion and these other aspects of culture? And there's only one way to do that, and that is to go to living populations, living cultures that are being studied by ethnographers, by our colleagues in cultural anthropology, and use them as analogies.
In Copan, the team is still looking for the first Maya leader who gained greater prestige than his peers. They wonder, did big men emerge here as they did in New Guinea? In the center of the Copan Valley is an area that later became the Acropolis, the palaces and temples of the royal family. A half-mile away, archaeologists reconstructed a smaller compound called 9N8 after its location on a map. Archaeologist Bill Fash excavated in this compound in 1981. The buildings on top were completed in the 8th century AD. The Maya built them atop layers of earlier buildings and plaster courtyards. Fash dug down through the plazas to ruins from the first millennium BC. The Maya buried their dead here shortly after the earlier society buried theirs in the caves. Stone walls enclosed 50 skeletons, each laid out flat. Most of the graves looked the same. A pot or a small jade artifact accompanied a few of the skeletons.
But there was one individual who was very different, who stood out from the rest, because buried with him were a number of very fabulous offerings. Included among those offerings were 4 ceramic vessels, very finely made pots, 2 of which carry religious symbolism. This one carries the undulating body of a snake, and the red one here has a very interesting design consisting of what's called a flame eyebrow here over the eye of the sky dragon.
The designs were imported from a distant society. This Maya man's prestige was reinforced by exotic symbols like this cross.
So this individual was involved in religious beliefs that tended to sort of lift him up above the level of his contemporaries. He was showing that he had access to esoteric and religious knowledge that his brethren didn't. Also buried with this individual was an incredible array of jades. This is far and away the richest single offering of jade found with burials of this Middle Preclassic period anywhere in the Maya lowlands.
Clearly, this Maya man had acquired great prestige. But was he a big man like Onca or the leader of a more complex society? Could he have been a chief? More evidence was needed. In Copan, archaeologists search for the first evidence of inherited rank. Bill Fash changes his focus from the ruins at 9 and 8 to the temples and palaces of the highest-ranking lineage, or royal family. The stairways of these tall buildings surround the East Court, a raised plaza that sits 100 feet above the valley floor. Looking for evidence of the earliest inherited rank, Fash descends deep beneath the Acropolis. Tunneling down to the temples of Boots Chan, who became the 11th king in AD 578, they peel away the layers of time. Past the ruins of the 7th king, Water Lily Jaguar, who rose to power in AD 504. Finally, they break through the roof of an ancient temple. In the front room of the temple, the workers uncovered a carved Maya stela. It fixes the monument in time.
When a later Maya king ritually buried this temple in order to build his own temple pyramid on top of it, he broke off this upper portion of the stela and wedged it between these two columns in the front part of the temple. The inscription itself tells us of a very important date early in Copan's history. The date in the Maya calendar reads 9 Baktuns, 0 Katuns, 0 Tuns, 0 Inals, and 0 Kings. It corresponds to the year AD 435, making this the earliest known inscription from Copan.
Some archaeologists estimate that by 435, the population of the valley had grown to include between 2,000 and 4,000 people. That size suggests Copan was then a chiefdom.
The name of the ruler who actually commemorated this stela appears up here on the side of the monument.
Although archaeologists can't yet read his name, he describes himself here as having an eye like the sun. Later kings would use the same description for themselves. In the next glyph, he says that his father was the man named in a third glyph, the founder of the dynasty. This is the earliest evidence that Copan rulers passed their rank to heirs. A big man could not do that. To some archaeologists, this was evidence of ongoing leadership, of a ranked society, a chiefdom. After the reign of the first kings of Copan, the population continued to grow to about 15,000 by AD 700. At this level, some societies begin to form states, political organizations where real power is centralized. But was there evidence that the highest-ranking chief actually consolidated rulership to become head of state here? These are stelae of the 12th ruler of Copan, a man named Smoke Imish. As king, he was head of the highest-ranking lineage, the royal family. He and his predecessors probably controlled the valley's best land, immediately surrounding the Acropolis. The rest of the valley was controlled by the heads of 40 or more competing lineages, like the one at 9 and 8. Beginning in AD 600, many new houses appeared. Within the reign of Smoke Imish, the population nearly doubled. Conflicts over the best land on the valley floor surely increased. To resolve such disputes, centralized rulers often emerge. Was Smoke Imish declaring this new authority at these locations on the outskirts of the Copan Valley? Here on a hillside at the valley's east end, Smoke Imish erected this carved stela. It was the first time any of the Copan kings had located a stela away from the royal compound. He placed 3 more stelae at the other boundaries. Was he staking a claim to the entire valley? The heir to Smoke Imish consolidated additional power. His name was 18 Rabbit. 18 Rabbit built the great plaza and filled it with larger-than-life portraits of himself. He ordered construction of a palace, known today as Structure 22. Could his large personal residence mean that 18 Rabbit centralized authority and served as the head of a state? To answer this, archaeologists would need an objective way to measure power. Archaeologist Elliot Abrams and 2 stonemasons climbed to an ancient Maya quarry site. Abrams is trying to calculate just how much labor the king had under his command. How many workers were required to build the Palace of 18 Rabbit?
It would be wonderful to observe Mayan Indians building the structures that they built at Copan. Of course, that's impossible, so we have to set up experiments which replicate the behaviors as best as possible.
Abrams times each of the construction phases as the Maya might have performed them. Knowing the Maya used only stone tools, Abrams estimates that 2 people could quarry over 3,000 pounds of rock in a day.
I see. Yeah.
He times the other processes, like transportation. knowing that the Maya had no wheels or draft animals. Abrams also times the manufacture of the blocks and construction of part of a wall. 5 cubic feet takes 80 minutes. By measuring all the walls in a building, Abrams estimates the time needed to complete the masonry. He then adds this figure to the times for other processes like backfilling dirt behind the walls and plastering the exterior.
I selected structure 22 to quantify as an example of royal palaces in the main group. When the methodology was applied to that structure, it was concluded that the energy expended was about 30,000 person days.
That would be 300 people working for 100 days in the dry season, the only time that they didn't have to farm. The homes of the laborers required 50 to 100 person days, perhaps a few people working for a month. By far, these were the most common type of household in Copan. The disparity provided more evidence that a state had indeed evolved. King 18 Rabbit built more than any other Copan king, before or after him, according to William Sanders.
I think this would be the time when the power of the lineage heads was at its weakest, and the power of the central authority was at its highest. The power of the king was at its highest in Copan's history.
But even then, royal power was limited, according to archaeologist and co-director of several Copan excavations, David Webster.
I think power is the ability of leaders to coerce people into doing things they don't want to do. You get power like that generally in one of two ways: by having some kind of force or threat of force behind your demands, like a military force, or you get power by having something, land, water, some scarce resource that other people need, and you manipulate them that way. I don't think Maya kings were powerful in either sense.
The kings ruled not so much through power, but through their authority to settle disputes, spearhead the common defense, and control some land. They also gained enormous prestige by redistributing precious goods and by leading religious rituals. But the authority of the kings suffered a critical blow in AD 738 when 18 Rabbit was captured and beheaded by the ruler of a rival city. Adjoining 18 Rabbit's palace was a smaller structure, the only known building erected by his successor, King Smoke Monkey. Some archaeologists think it was a council house where the last weakened kings shared power with competing lineage heads. Today, workers sift through the remains of the building, seeking clues to the fate of the kingdom. Did the death of one king end the evolution of the Copan state? To find out, other archaeologists broaden the search for evidence of power changes in the valley's lineage compounds. Very near to the 9N8 compound is a series of large, unexcavated mounds. Here, David Webster and his team prepare to excavate. They will cut the brush that has grown on top of the buildings and then attempt to clear away the mystery of the lineage heads. As Copan evolved from a chiefdom to a state, did the lineage heads acquire an additional source of power? The team plots the size and distribution of the mounds. Large variations will show significant differences in wealth.
Okay, bring it a couple centimeters closer to you. Okay, a little bit farther away from you. Good, good, right there.
From their measurements, the archaeologists create a contour map. The tallest mounds outside of the Acropolis surround a central courtyard. The largest mounds date to the time following the death of 18 Rabbit. Surrounding the large mounds are smaller ones. They are almost unnoticeable. Digging into the small mounds, the team discovers low stone foundations once covered with pole and thatched houses. David Webster.
There's a lot of this cobbled masonry with stuff taken right out of the river. The rooms are small. There's a whole string of these that go around the entire group here. Apparently, there was a concentric circle of them around the entire elite compound. These things have sleeping benches, just like domestic residences usually do at Copan. They have plenty of occupational debris, all sorts of trash, broken pots, obsidian, grinding stones. There are burials associated with these buildings. In other words, these look just like domestic habitations.
They were houses. And if Copan were still a chiefdom, no one could have lived in houses much bigger than these, not even the chiefs. There would have been no separate classes. On the large mounds in the center of the compound, the crew finds stones that are quite different from those in the small houses. Large beveled blocks cover the tops of the mounds. Webster has a good idea how the blocks were used. Later, he heads for the royal compound to confirm his hunch. Here was a corbel vault, one way of building a stone roof. It required a great deal of material and skilled labor to cut and assemble the vault stones. The archaeologists expected to find vaulted ceilings in the royal compound. They knew kings could afford such labor. Suddenly, after the death of 18 Rabbit, vaulted roofs began to appear in other lineage compounds as well. And instead of thatched roofs, the largest buildings now had expensive stone roofs. In the rubble of one, the archaeologists discovered another surprise.
We got another one under here, Phil, that I don't think you did see.
The team unearths finely cut pieces of sculpture. Each piece is carefully marked and drawn to identify where it originally fit on the building. The sculpture is taken back to a lab for analysis.
Lift it up. We'll put some more. All right, try there. That's good.
Project artist Barbara Fash works with students to reconstruct a complete picture of the fragments.
I think it looks good.
Fash drew a reconstruction of the sculptures on the building's facade. Quality work like this usually adorned only the palaces of Maya kings. But here was significant non-royal wealth. Did it belong to the lineage as a whole or to one individual? The final clue was found inside. These large raised platforms covered with white plaster are the sleeping benches once used by the lineage head. This was the palace of a nobleman, surrounded by the small houses of his poor relatives.
And we got the other end over here. Yeah. We've got a lot of the stones that have...
How did the lineage head rise so dramatically above his low-ranking kin? Individuals or groups usually acquire power by gaining control of an essential but scarce resource. Webster and Sanders want to identify that resource and understand how it was controlled. In agricultural societies, the scarce resource is either water or land. Webster and Sanders wonder, might modern land use help explain the political evolution of the ancients? The most fertile land has always been on the valley floor. That's why the Maya first settled here. In the beginning, there were fewer people. Then, as Copan grew into a chiefdom, each lineage head managed a separate plot of land on behalf of his kin group. As the population grew more rapidly, settlement expanded far beyond the original community. In the valley, there was not enough land to go around, and just like today, thousands of farmers spread into the surrounding hillsides.
As the population expands, they start colonizing these slope areas, which are more marginal agricultural land. And then as the population gets even larger, they're forced into the colonization of the other pockets of the valley. They must crop even the land up in these tiny little tributary valleys.
But the poor soils on these mountainsides could hardly produce enough food for the expanding population. To compensate, the Maya were forced to produce even more food from their very best land. It is possible that they began a simple farming technique to grow crops here, even in the dry season. David Webster.
This little irrigation canal is the kind of thing the Maya might have built hundreds or thousands of years ago to water these nice patches of green bottomland that you see here. You can get 2 or 3 crops a year off this kind of land if you have some sort of irrigation. People who have access to or who own this rich, irrigable part of the valley, which is only a very small portion of it, tend to be the wealthy and politically powerful people in the system. And I suspect it was very much like that among the prehistoric Maya.
Webster believes the low-ranking Maya depended on the nobles, just as these poor farmers depend on the modern landowners. During certain months of the year, a wealthy landowner permits these two men to grow food for their families on the rich bottomland. Like the ancient Maya, they plant without the aid of a plow.
Buenos días. Yes.
The farmers explain to William Sanders they pay a steep price to feed their families.
El rendimiento que recibe es todo para ustedes. No lo tienen que dividir o dar echando nada. Todo es para ustedes.
The farmers pay the landowner not with cash or part of their crop, but with something equally precious, their labor. The poor farmers live in these thatched huts. To fulfill their obligation to the landowner, they descend to the valley each day during the irrigation season to tend tobacco and other cash crops. Like the poor modern farmers, the expanding ancient Maya population also needed more food. The only place to grow enough was in the bottomland, and that was controlled by the lineage heads. When Copan was a chiefdom, the lineage heads managed this land on behalf of their kin. Gradually, with so many hungry relatives living in the surrounding hills, the lineage heads eventually exploited their control over the scarce bottomland. Sanders and Webster think that the new nobles granted access to the land only if their commoner relatives paid with their labor. Below these buildings are earlier foundations. They show that the size of elite homes grew gradually over hundreds of years. Then, beginning in AD 750, construction accelerated. What did the size of these new homes say about political power in the changing Copan state? Archaeologists calculated the time required to construct the houses of the nobles. The noble palace at 9 and 8 required about 9,000 person days. Comparing that with the palace of 18 Rabbit, the king only spent 3 times more labor than the noble. But the noble's palace required 90 times more labor than a commoner's house. It appears that Copan society split into at least 3 classes: royalty, commoners, and a new class of nobles in between. Archaeologists are now finding evidence of new noble wealth in dozens of lineage compounds throughout the valley. They wonder if the nobles began to seriously challenge the power of the kings. In the royal compound, archaeologists are beginning to re-examine the end of the Copan dynasty. Bill Fash.
Just next to 18 Rabbits Building, Structure 22, was built a much smaller edifice. Inside of it is a hieroglyphic bench, which, though badly deteriorated, does contain one crucial detail. That is that the second glyph here reads Yash Pak, name of the 16th and final ruler of Copan. This is pretty typical for Yash Pak. What he seems to do is make smaller structures or add on to previously existing buildings constructed by his predecessors, and then be sure to put his name on it in a prominent place. Previously, we thought this meant that he was a great builder and he constructed everything in the Acropolis. But now, through new excavations and new readings, we realize that all he did was add a final layer onto the top of the previously existing buildings.
When archaeologists excavated Yash Pak's tomb, it was empty. How did he die? Was he captured by a rival state, or perhaps assassinated in a coup d'etat? Whatever his fate, Yash Pak was the last king of Copan. After his death, no one consolidated rulership again. Throughout its history, the growth of the Copan state was always limited by the competing lineage heads and the political skills of the king.
He's a very charismatic individual. If he's very energetic and he's very sagacious in playing off one lineage head against the other, he may accumulate a great deal of power. But then if his successor is a relatively weak, unenergetic individual, then of course the lineage heads take over again. I think this is the natural pattern, these ups and downs. Decentralization is still there in the sense that you've got this class of people who have an independent source of power, their own direct followers, you see. And what you have to do is eradicate that whole system of kin-based structure if you want to consolidate power. And I don't think that would have ever happened here. I don't think it ever happened anywhere in the Maya lowlands. So I think there was a kind of rank society combined with certain state institutions here at Copan, and that's as far as it was going to go.
So how much further did ancient states evolve? Where else might archaeologists find evidence of greatly centralized political power combined with a large number of social classes? Several New World states were larger than the kingdoms of the Maya.